So welcome everyone. We still have some people trickling in here, but today is a fascinating UK roundtable event with Julian Venables, Lara Zuydam, and Frank Clifford. Before we begin, my name is Jeff Grunland. I'm with OPA, and I just want to talk quickly about an event we have coming up next April through June. This is our first Astrologer in 2 years, and we're very excited to be having an event in person again after not being able to for so long. The online sessions will begin at the beginning of April, and they will run sporadically weekly throughout June. The in-person event is from April 29th through May 1st. And iAstrologer is a little different than a typical astrology conference because we're not necessarily teaching astrology. We're teaching about how to professionalize and build your practice as a professional astrologer. So all kinds of mentorship programs in that respect, learning how to brand your business, software tutorials, websites, social media, consulting skills, ethics, legal issues, as well as a photo shoot. I'll be shooting professional photos of everyone. So in person in Tucson. So we're looking forward to this again. 2 years ago, we hosted this also in Tucson, and it was a fantastic turnout and was received very well. So we're looking forward to hosting again in person. We hope you can make it, if not to Tucson, at least in person online. So you can go to opaastrologyevents.org to check out more. And thank you for listening. And I'm going to pass this over to Tracie, your host for today.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That's wonderful. And just want to say welcome to everybody joining live today, and also to those of you watching the recording as well who aren't with us in person but are interested in this very exciting UK webinar today. So I'd just like to welcome our three wonderful guests, Frank Clifford, Lara von Zuydam, and Julian Venables. And we're going to be starting off today with the wonderful Frank, who is going to be talking about the zodiac of the nodes. So a little bit of info about the talk. Your draconic chart, which has its beginning at your north node, is a tool that provides deep insight into your life meaning and purpose. It also offers a way of seeing the remarkable synastry between you and those with whom you're compelled to have profound relationships. So Frank is the publisher of Pamela Crane's landmark book, The Draconic Chart. To learn how to read this most revealing of horoscopes, oh, sorry, said that a little bit wrong. This session will also help you pinpoint the all-important sensitive degrees of your birth chart. So Frank was honoured with the Charles Harvey Award for Exceptional Service to Astrology in 2012, a Writing Award from ISAR in 2016, and a Regulus Award nomination in 2018. His books include The Interpretation Manual, Getting to the Heart of Your Chart, and A Guide to Forecasting, and The Solar Arc Handbook. Frank teaches astrology and palmistry online and in London, and you can find him at the London School of Astrology.com. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Frank for his presentation of the zodiac of the nodes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tracie, and Jeff as well. It's great to be here. I hope my sharing of the screen didn't upset. I was trying to give you the text to read out, make it easier for you, Tracie, but it may not have done that. All right, so let me shut that down. Okay, so we've got 25 minutes. I'm going to do my best to give you an idea of what draconic astrology is all about. I looked up the word spiritual this morning because it's got so many different connotations, and this is a spiritual astrology day. And I really came to the conclusion, I think, for the time being anyway, that it's spirituality is about recognizing or honoring the human spirit. And for me, that means to be the best version of yourself that you can be. And in a way, that starts off with obviously taking care of yourself, looking after yourself, loving yourself, and then daring to do that with other people, of course. So to me, it's an issue of personal growth and excellence. And I think the draconic chart can reveal that with great accuracy too. So I want to introduce you to this new chart. Well, it's not that new, to be honest. A lot of people over the last sort of 40, 50 years have been exploring this chart in modern times and looking at this. And I'm going to explain everything about how to work it out. Your computer will do the rest. And I'd like you to just really, if you wish, print your draconic chart out after you've heard this talk and just study it for a while. Have a look at the degrees, have a look at different facets of it and see whether it adds anything to your understanding, because we as astrologers love to try and add new things to the horoscope all the time, and sometimes that can mean diminishing returns. And so I'm very hesitant to do more and to introduce a whole new zodiac. We've always been working with the tropical zodiac, most of us, sidereal, some of us, but the draconic has its own meaning, I guess. And so it's not going to replace anything, but it may add to what you're looking for or what you're trying to focus on. To get your draconic chart position, see how many degrees your north node, your tropical north node, needs to go back to 0 Aries. So say you've got your north node at 0 Taurus, take it back to 30 degrees to 0 Aries, and then everything else goes back the same number of degrees. Okay. So really, if you want to see it in a different way, depending on how your Mercury works, think of your north node as the very beginning of your draconic chart, 0 Aries. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to look at that very easily in a moment. But as I say, the computer will do a lot of it for you and save you a lot of head scratching along the way. Pam Crane, who wrote the book really on draconic astrology, uses the true node. So I've started to use that in looking at that. I think when you're learning from someone, a master or somebody who's recognized in the field, use their house system for a while, use their node, whatever they use, and then go off and do your own thing if you want to. So it's the same chart as your tropical zodiac chart in terms of house position and aspects. But it's the degrees that can change quite widely in that sense. So let's take a quick look. On the left, we've got the tropical chart. Now, this person was born with the north node at 11.5 degrees Aries. And we're going to take the north node back to 0 Aries. So really, the north node is the start of the zodiac, 0 Aries. So everything else in the chart moves back about 11.5 degrees. Okay, so the midheaven goes from 24 to 13. That's about 11.5 degrees. The moon goes back from 2 Sag to 21 Scorpio. When it's very little like this, when you've got a north node that's in Pisces or in Aries, the chart's not going to change that much. But some of you will have north nodes that are well into the zodiac, and then the chart will move accordingly. But as you can see from the two charts here, the planets are still in the same houses. They're still the same aspectual relationship to each other, like the Uranus-Pluto are still 5 degrees apart, but and still on the descendant, but they've gone back 11.5 degrees. So everybody's draconic north node will be at 0 Aries because that marks the beginning of the zodiac. Okay, so that's all we need to think about. Don't try and do it in your head. If you've got something like 24 degrees Leo north node, and then you think about how many degrees that is back, just get the computer to do it for you. I want to show you vividly how to do it, but the computer will do the rest, believe me. Okay, now this is the draconic chart is based on the nodes, the north and the south node, and there's a lot written about the nodes. They're very popular in certain areas of astrology, in particular, focused on tremendously in areas like evolutionary astrology, of course. And I run a school in China now and in Japan. In China, they're obsessed with the nodes at the moment, and they're always asking me to do nodal stuff. Of course, the nodes aren't new by any means, but they're sort of being rediscovered by new generations, I think, in recent decades. The nodes form an axis, and I think the nodes really speak about your greatest gifts, what I call a library of knowledge, that's the south node, and the invitation to expand your world, expand your gifts, that's the north node. okay? And there's a sense often when we read about the South Node, don't stay there. You've got to be moving towards your North Node. Well, you know, we could say that about the MC and the IC. And yet I think to be able to attend, to look after both ends of any axis is going to be important. We don't just spend all our time on the descendant or the ascendant. It's a delicate balancing act always when we have a nodal or angular axis or polarity. So the South Node, we talk about unconscious or compulsive responses that we're supposed to leave behind. But really, I think of it as your great gift, that fountain of knowledge. The North Node requires us to make a conscious choice to do more with our lives, to stretch ourselves, to tap into new experience. Think of it as emergent potential, personal evolution, rather than a sense of the unknown. Again, it's about just tapping into two different sides, one that's quite familiar and comfortable, and the one requires you stepping out of a different experience. And this is what the Draconic chart is based on. It's based on the nodes. So it's important to have an understanding, I think, of the nodes themselves. And in my opinion, not be too critical or damning of the South Node. Okay. Some of you will have the North Node near Aries, like our example just now. If it's very close to 0 Aries, Pamela Crane calls these people, what you see is what you get. They're doing their life work. They're doing what they're born to do in a very obvious way. We'll look at a few more ideas around that in a minute. Or you could have your nodes in Libra, maybe around 0 Libra, 29 Virgo, like this example here, where the North Node is 0 degrees Libra. And so everything in the chart is flipped. Obviously, they stay in the same houses, but Neptune goes from about 16 Sagittarius to about 15 Gemini. Everything flips about 180 degrees, roughly. Okay, so again, thinking about the orientation, but your Draconic chart will look in terms of houses and aspects to the angles to each other, all the planets to each other. It will look the same, but they'll just be in different signs. You could say the tropical map is all about your individual human evolution on this earth, dealing with life, taxes and food and all sorts of things that keep us grounded, that we have to earn a living, work with our life, get a job, get a vocation perhaps. That's the tropical chart. The Draconic is said to talk more about the cosmic purpose. Now, it's said to reflect the things that you've accumulated, wisdoms, teachings, insights, over your lifetimes. Now, the trouble I have with that is that I don't like to enforce any belief system onto my astrology. So you may not believe in past lives. I personally think we've had past lives before, but I don't know. I've never been regressed. I've never seen that many great demonstrations of it just yet. But I'm very open, and I do feel that's a possibility. But the idea that it has to be past life, a bit like the nodes, tends to put people off. It certainly puts me off a little bit as well. But it's said, the Draconic chart, when you read Pam Crane's work, etc., it's said to be things that you've accumulated over the years. I like to think of it as inner convictions, the values, the higher principles that we have, the way that we can use them. And I'll show you the interaction in a moment of how we can do that. So to me, even if you move aside the idea that of the idea of past lives and reincarnation and your natal chart, whether it's Draconic or tropical, reflecting past life conditions, you can still see it as an important tool in the following ways. Okay. So in a way, I like to think of it, and this comes again from some insights from Pam Crane, as revealing who you are if your greatest potential could be manifested. And the rest of the chart's too similar to the tropical for it to be that widely different. The way that I see it is that it's a set of characteristics. You might be a sun in Sagittarius, tropically, your regular natal chart, but you've got the sun in Cancer in your Draconic chart, and you just happen to come alive when you're doing caring work for people, when you're with family, when you're connected to people of your tribe, for instance. That's an example of how the Draconic comes out simply, and we tend to do our best work sometimes when we're living the potential of the Draconic, or playing out the characteristics, the best characteristics of the signs of our Draconic. I have to tell you, some years ago, you know, when we have prejudices, don't we, when we begin astrology and when we learn astrology, and one of them, you know, we all say, oh, I'd never date a sun in Pisces, or, you know, all that nonsense after we've had some experiences with people. And I remember looking at charts and learning astrology from the age of 16. I've been doing it a long time, and thinking, oh, what I have most trouble with is the sun in Cancer, that energy, that moody energy sometimes, as an Aries that I felt was moody. And moon in Scorpio, I found difficult. And Virgo rising, I found difficult. And when I did my Draconic chart, I had those three exactly in those places. So fascinating that it really gave me a kick up the behind in recognizing what it is I'm here to do in some ways. So I think of the Draconic chart as reflecting a higher level of energy, not just here on Earth dealing with life, but maybe some of the emotional or spiritual energy of service that's connected to some of the powerful things that we can do best. We don't have to do them. We can just do our tropical. You don't have to tap into your Draconic if you don't want to. There's no crime. I don't think there's a pass mark when we go to our maker at the end of our lives. Oh, you got a B- because you didn't do your Draconic. My feeling is it's there for you to tap into. But the thing is, you'll recognize it. When you do your Draconic chart and you look at your sun, moon, and ascendant, you'll really recognize, you think, oh, of course, that explains so much more of what when I feel alive, when I'm involved, when I'm doing my best work, it's there. Okay. So I think of it as a reservoir of pure sun sign qualities. Yeah, I think of Aries to Pisces, and the very best of those. Your Draconic gives you an opportunity to do those in those sun, moon, ascendant, and the rest of those planets in those areas. It's not designed to replace your tropical chart or to confuse you anymore if you've got too many things to think about. Let it add to the bigger picture. Let it add to the sense of purpose, a recognition of the things that have been special for you. So create a bi-wheel, or I would say, first of all, just print out your Draconic before looking at everything else. Look at the ascendant, the sun and the moon, and even the ascendant ruler, just absorb them for a bit. Their aspects to each other, their house positions are going to be the same, of course, but there'll be new signs. And also I want you to look at the degrees. For example, my moon is at 21 Scorpio in the Draconic chart. All the people in my life that have been powerful and strongly influenced have the sun, moon, or ascendant in their tropical charts, and occasionally Draconic charts, at 21 or 20 degrees Scorpio. It just comes up all the time. And it took me until I saw the Draconic chart to realize how important, because my moon is there Draconically at 21 Scorpio. So many people in my life have that, okay? So look at what changes as well. Maybe you go from being mutable and lots of air to being maybe cardinal with lots of water. Yeah, have a think about that as well. And remember, if they're very different, it's not like there's a big disconnect between the two. It's not like you're not doing your proper work. Yeah, use the Draconic sign placements, and then new territories, new pathways appear. And usually they feel totally natural to you. So again, you don't have to use it, but if you do, recognize that if there are differences, then there are new things that you can bring on board and really make you feel alive in that sense. Okay. When they align, it's a chance to work directly with the deeper Draconic positions in a tropical setting. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. Okay, so what you can do is you look at your own new chart, look at your sun, moon, ascendant of your Draconic, then you start to look at how your tropical and Draconic interact. particularly conjunctions and oppositions up to 5 degrees. Keep it simple. Just look at how they connect. And then finally, look at how your draconic matches with other people's tropical and vice versa. And that's where it gets a little bit busy, as we astrologers love to do, you know, to print out charts and see all the connections. You'll notice the synastry is absolutely profound. I'm going to show you one example of that in a moment. Okay. So you will find, once you've got your tropical chart ready, and you know this very clearly, but once you've got your draconic sun, moon, and ascendant, make a note of those degrees. They're highly sensitive areas, magnets, people we get entangled with. So my moon at 21 Scorpio in draconic, the draconic chart is a magnet towards tropical charts with 21 Scorpio, give or take a degree or two. Often it's absolutely within a degree. It's quite remarkable. Think of them knots, nodes. Node means knot. Think of entanglements and or magnets, how we pull people in and why we're pulled into other people's lives and experiences too. You could call them soul agreements, soulmates, twin flames, whatever you call them. Look at them and call them, you know, at least address them and have a look. All right. Now, everybody's talking about this couple at the moment. I was hesitant because I've just written an article for the next Mountain Astrologer coming out in a month or two on the draconic chart. And I've used this example, and they're being really, really criticized at the moment. And I wanted to look at these charts because if you look at the tropical and the tropical, so we've got Harry in the center and all his house, equal house cusps. I use equal houses with a floating MC, IC. Use whatever works, use whatever speaks to you. If we look at tropical and tropical, we can see some very obvious connections. They both understand wounding of the moon Chiron conjunction. They both understand the importance of home and family, and perhaps the wound of not being connected to family. We can see that this is the outer wheel as Megan's chart, her tropical Mars is on his descendant. That's a real, I'll protect you type of aspect. I'll fight for you and etc. But there's not a huge amount of interaspects between those charts, just a few ones. When I'm looking at conjunctions and oppositions, I mean, just 5 degrees. There's a Venus-Pluto as well. It's about 4 degrees apart, and Uranus South Node. That gives you some of the picture of what they're working with. If you take a look at the other interconnections, and I know some of you will be watching this on video, so pause and just absorb some of this information rather than expect to think of all of it right now, because we've only got a few more minutes left. We've got Harry's tropical again. He's a sun in Virgo, Capricorn rising. And then we've got Megan's draconic. So what I want to say about that is think of the draconic person's chart. So your other half, look at their draconic and see what it might be, what they're the best of what they can do and how they can help you, how they can interact, and in a way, how you can do joint work together. We can see immediately, and this is not 10-degree orbs or very minor aspects, we can see that Megan's draconic descendant is on Harry's sun. That's classic. Sun, moon, ascendant, descendant connections in people that are really compelled to experience life together. So in a way, her relationship experiences will help him become the sun in Virgo he was born to be tropically. So her experience of everything from naturopathy and alternatives, etc., all the best of Virgo will come in and help him understand and help him with his natural sun in Virgo anxiety, need for perfectionism, awareness of doing a right job or trying to do the very best. That's the first one. Her midheaven connects to his Uranus in Sagittarius. So it's not surprising that together they've moved to another country, they've relocated, they've cut off, they've connected. She's in a way saying, be free. She's given him an opportunity to be free. Whatever your opinion on it, whatever you're reading, my mum reads the Daily Mail and she thinks that Megan's a bossy one who wears the trousers. And I think, how the hell do we know? You know, the charts can give us information otherwise, okay? So the midheaven to Uranus is another example of a close connection. Saturn her Saturn is, no, sorry, his, let me work this one out. Yes, her Venus is opposite his Saturn, another classic relationship connection of commitment and I'm there for you. And there's also a Chiron Jupiter IC connection. Okay, this is what she can bring from her highest self, her accumulation of lifetimes, however you want to see it, whatever your belief system or approach. Let's take another look for a moment. Now, this is her tropical chart in the middle. She has a sun in Leo with Cancer rising, and this is his draconic in the outer wheel. And again, we've got startling connections. What he knows how to do over lifetimes or innately at the best he can be is his sun in Cancer, and it's bang on her ascendant. So he knows how to create a family with her, how to protect her, and really got a sense that that's what's going to be important, particularly to her ascendant, tropical ascendant. He wants to protect her physically. We know that, of course, with his anxieties about what the media did and the part they played in his mother's life and in allegedly in her death. So that's the first one. He brings that to her ascendant. There's a Venus-Saturn midheaven. Let me work that one out. Her Venus connects to his Saturn very clearly, just like there was a previous Saturn-Venus connection. There's a Uranus-IC instead of a Uranus-MC, again, saying how important that need for freedom, breaking away, doing your own thing. There's a Pluto-Mars. There's lots of other things as well. Okay. Then the final slide, I promise, of interaction here is the draconic to the draconic. Okay, and in a way, this is what he can do best and what she can do best in their lives and how they meet, and perhaps why the soul, if you want to call it, or the spirit is entwined, why they're together in a sense. And again, you can see Sun Uranus very clearly, that need perhaps to break free, Uranus, from family, from that sense of the tribe, form their own unique set of connections. Neptune, Venus, the idea of him being a prince and her being a glamorous Hollywood actress, etc., or Canadian actress working in Canada. There's also an amazing connection here, again, within a degree of the ascendant, her ascendant in Pisces connecting to his moon. Very, very clearly. There are lots of others as well, like the Sun Chiron, and of course, this Venus on the descendant. So the example here starts to tell us about this compelling magnet that we have when we look not just at our tropical charts together. They can tell us a lot, but if we go beyond and start to look interdimensionally, we'll see connections that really reveal the pattern. So that's where I'm going to leave it. We have to finish now. It's 5:30. That's the book that Pamela wrote. It's very in depth. It looks at all sorts of angles and transits and midpoints and synastry and the rest of it as well. So have a look at that if that interests you, or come and see me. I'm doing a lot more on the draconic chart in the next few months, and maybe a little bit longer than 20 minutes, 25 minutes, fingers crossed. So over to you. Is there anything that we need to answer? Or I don't think there are no questions. I've obviously just spoken at everybody for the last 20, 25 minutes. Anything that you need to ask at all?
Yes, anyone, if you have any questions for Frank, this is the time now. Anything that came up for you during that wonderful presentation, please, you can either post the questions in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself for a question. Christy says, thanks, Frank, amazing as always, love hearing you talk. Seth from Bayo, very interesting and insightful. Okay, can you see the questions, Frank?
Yes. Sean, hi Sean, thank you, and thanks. I recognize a lot of names in here, so thank you for being here, and I hope you have a fabulous other couple of talks. What am I using? I'm using Astro Gold because I use a Mac and I love my Solar Fire. Astro Gold is like a mini Solar Fire for the Mac, and I just like it. It's simple, and if I really need to do lots of complicated stuff and print out. I go to my PC over here and print them out on Solarfire. But I'm sure most programs now have a draconic option. Just instead of topical, click on there and have a look. You'll find sidereal and various Vedic options perhaps as well. And you'll also see draconic. So put that in, print it out, absorb it, and then you'll start to see why, particularly your sun, moon, and ascendant degrees, keep featuring in the charts of the people that drive you mad, that drive you crazy in a good way, and all other things as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you, Tracie. Thank you. And I shall disappear. So then I'll turn this off, and then we'll let Lara come in and do that. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.
And yeah, if anyone wants to find you, you are, they can find you at the London School of Astrology.com.
That's right. That's me some of the time.
Fascinating. Wow, I'm definitely going to do that. Thank you so much. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce you to Lara van Zuydam, who is going to be talking about the roadmap of the soul, examining the birth chart through an Alice A. Bailey lens. So in this presentation, Lara delves into some of the spiritual themes that emerge in Alice Bailey's esoteric astrology, with particular reference to the lines along which the chart of the soul must be drawn. So Lara is an astrologer, yoga teacher, mystic, and financial services lawyer. She has studied Hellenistic Mitra George and Chris Brennan, has a practitioner's level honorary certification through the School of Traditional Astrology, and most recently obtained a certificate in Vedic astrology from Kepler College, where she has also studied medical astrology. So medical astrology led Lara to the acutonic system of energetic medicine, which involves the use of tuning forks that correspond to planetary and other sound frequencies. She has 104 hours of training accredited by the Acutonics Institute of Integrative Medicine, having completed Acutonics levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. She's also a Yoga Alliance registered yoga teacher and specifically certified to teach yin yoga and mindfulness meditation. So as a practicing financial services lawyer, Lara naturally has an interest in the financial markets. And last year she presented on the astrology of cryptocurrency at the 52nd Annual Astrological Association Conference in the UK. Lara is strongly motivated to act in service to humanity. And one of the ways in which she tries to make a difference is by encouraging people to overcome fear by integrating both light and shadow. She expresses this in particular through astrology, tarot, and yoga. So what a fantastic webinar we have coming up now. I'm really looking forward to this one. So Lara, are you ready for your presentation?
I am indeed.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Handing over to you. Thank you.
Fantastic. So following on from Frank's very appropriate comment that it's quite tricky to impose values as astrologers, we're about to enter some very controversial waters indeed. However, I would like you to try to suspend judgment for the duration of this presentation. Take what's valuable, what resonates with you, and discard the rest. I am merely attempting through this presentation to distill some very complex esoteric astrology philosophy that's been given to us by Alice Bailey, this really interesting character, put it in front of you in a way that's hopefully a little bit more digestible to you and allow you to make the decision for yourself. So onwards and upwards. So here's an overview of what, sorry, skipped ahead. This is the overview. This is what we'll attempt to cover in these 25 minutes. Appreciate we don't have a lot of time. It is very important to just spend a couple of minutes on the philosophy that underpins this esoteric astrology. So what are we talking about? Immediately, we're talking about something which we refer to as the soul, often confused with the spirit. In this case, it's referred to in esoteric astrology as the tireless watcher. So this is the immortal inner being, which theoretically incarnates repeatedly before merging with the ineffable divinity. Now, I refer to this as the ineffable divinity because the idea is, according to this philosophy, that we can't fully understand. We have no ability to comprehend the divine purpose, the divine plan, until we've reached a certain point in what we refer to as our soul evolution. Now, immediately, this potentially doesn't sit comfortably with some of us, because whenever we talk about evolution of the soul, we're implying some sort of hierarchy. But this is what we are given in this philosophy. This is what Alice Bailey has presented, and it is very interesting, if nothing else, to inform ourselves and just have a look into what she put before us. We're also talking about reincarnation. So the idea is that the soul is tasked with overcoming various challenges and lessons in the various incarnations. And the key point to note here is that individuals can either navigate those challenges with grace and wisdom, or they can make poor choices, indeed using their free will. And that can obviously result in them coming back into another incarnation, having not fully dealt with and assimilated the previous lesson, and then having to start the process again. So free will is an interesting concept. On the one hand, we can use it to empower ourselves, to make decisions that are in our best interest, to enable us to develop self-determination. On the other hand, we can also use our free will for ill. And the important thing is that free will in of itself is not bad, but it is the bad use of free will that can potentially set us back. And the whole idea underpinning this philosophy is that by using our free will in constructive ways, we can consciously reverse the wheel, as it's described, of incarnation, and eventually escape this endless cycle of birth and rebirth. Now I'm going to bring in the karma word at this point. Again, this doesn't necessarily sit comfortably with everyone. We tend to associate it with some sort of irrational punishment. Again, it implies hierarchy of sorts, but under this esoteric astrology philosophy, it tends to apply at the early stages of soul development. And the reality is, what it boils down is a form of what I like to refer to as natural justice. In other words, it's simply about cause and effect. If we don't assimilate the lessons in one lifetime because we haven't done work, for example, then indeed we come back in the next incarnation and have to deal with it again. I like to consider this philosophy as a sort of modified partial determinism, where we do have the ability to use our free will at a certain level, but ultimately there are certain factors that we come in specifically to assimilate an incarnation. So let's just have a think about what's behind this theory. And starting with Alice Bailey, I haven't mentioned anything about her. She was born in 1880 in the UK, but she spent a lot of her time in the US. She was a mystic, she was a teacher and a writer. The interesting thing, one of the many interesting things about this work, is that she claims to have received the information by way of channeling from an individual referring to himself as the Tibetan. Even more curiously, this Tibetan appears to, or she claims that he was present in physical form at the same time that she was alive. So it wasn't just that she was receiving this information esoterically. This individual was apparently telepathically communicating this information to her. And this Tibetan appears to have been a spiritual teacher. He, in fact, appears to have led a group of lamas, so spiritual teachers themselves. He claims also to have been in contact with a mysterious group of beings known as the hierarchy, and that comes into play as we delve more deeply into this content. We will learn a little bit more about that. Again, this is all going to sound quite off the wall. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I invite you to suspend judgment again and see what you make of it. So very quickly, if we look at the horoscope, which could be the natal chart, we'll be principally dealing with the natal chart, but also more widely other horoscopes, because those equally apply. As an evolutionary compass, we can do so through the lens of the evolution of soul. And what Alice Bailey and or the Tibetan, I'll use those terms interchangeably, said is that eventually astrologers of the future will be divided into two camps. On the one hand, the exoteric astrologers who will be concerned with what she described as the horoscope of the personality. And on the other hand, the esoteric astrologers who will be occupied with the purposes of the soul. So very interesting. The other important point to make at this stage is that underpinning this entire framework is this notion that the energy emitted by planetary bodies and constellations, which have an impact on humanity, have a direct impact on us through our etheric fields. So that is the whole notion underpinning this theory, and we don't have time to go into that. It's a complex subject in of itself, but interesting to note. And the whole idea of evolving as souls is that we begin to be able to learn to control our reactions to the planets as they appear in the natal chart. So once we are aware of our souls, we can then theoretically look at the planets, look at the patterns, and sometimes the less pleasant patterns that we're seeing, and use our minds to override the negative tendencies. And that is the idea as we begin to evolve. Secondarily to that, we also begin to consciously become the spiritual observer. We cultivate the power to respond to the soul, as Alice Bailey said. Fundamental to this philosophy is this notion of the three crosses. This is an interesting framework. So the idea, and you'll recognize the triplicities here, the idea is that we spend as souls some time on each one of these crosses. So if we think about them as levels, different levels of evolution, again, we're bringing in this notion of hierarchy, a bit controversial, but let's go with it for now. We start in the mutable cross. You'll see that each cross, of course, has 4 arms. And for the duration of our time on each one of these crosses, we grapple with the particular zodiacal influences that have a bearing on that particular cross. We all incarnate into the mutable cross. And in fact, we incarnate into Cancer, which is interesting because the Tibetan and/or Alice Bailey describe Cancer and Capricorn as the 2 polarities as the gateway of the zodiac. We know that the ancient astrologers had the same view, for example, in the Thema Mundi, which is apparently the inception chart for, the universe itself. It's the same for them. Cancer was in the ascendant and Capricorn on the opposite side of that pole. So very interesting. We're born into Cancer on the mutable cross, and we have to grapple with those various dynamics. We then move eventually onto the fixed cross. And the idea is that we move onto the fixed cross when we become aware that there's something more than just our physical existence out there, and we begin to engage purposely with the soul. Eventually, after many incarnations on the fixed cross, we get to the point where we're ready to move on to the cardinal cross. And you can see, obviously, the relevant zodiac signs attributed to the cardinal cross. And the idea, according to this theory, is that at that point, we have precisely 12 incarnations. And once we finish those 12 incarnations, we're then able to escape the eternal cycle of birth and rebirth, and we become spirit. So going into some of the theory underpinning these 3 crosses in a little more detail. And by the way, you're welcome to, I'm happy to share my slides with anyone if anyone wants to contact me directly, or you can indeed pause if you're watching the recording, just spend some time and assimilate some of this. They're quite useful as an aid memoir when you're doing your interpretation, if this interests you. The mutable cross is associated very much with the personality, so it's developing the personality. At this point, the individual, the new soul, doesn't have a panoramic awareness. They're not aware of the solar system and how that might impact them. They certainly aren't cosmically aware. They're very focused on the earth, that they have that planetary awareness. What they're faced with grappling with in the lifetime is very much around change. So the experiences that they have in the lifetime will be around change. And we can look as astrologers to the planet Mercury as an indication of one indication that an individual might be on the mutable cross stage. If, for example, Mercury is very prominent, very active, it's not to be seen in isolation. Bearing in mind, we need to, as always, use our judgment, give every element weight, and then put it all together very cohesively in a very responsible way, bearing in mind the very tricky ethics around this potentially. If we look at the fixed cross, this is when the individual soul they become soul aware. They're now considered to be a disciple. They become more systemically aware. In other words, they're aware of the solar system as I see it. They are forced to engage with crisis, and it's Saturn that rules that. Finally, cardinal cross. This is the cross of the spirit, or what's known as the initiate. They're about to transfer off that third and final cross and become spirit and be free, essentially, as a soul. That's the theory. They have cosmic awareness, and they are forced to deal with change and crisis. And Jupiter is very much responsible for catalyzing those experiences. Now, throughout these experiences on the 3 crosses, the individual must undergo various initiations, also referred to as deaths by Bailey. And these are important initiations by water and by fire, and they refer to the different crosses. So for example, the mutable cross is associated with Pisces, and that's basically where the individual eventually becomes free of all those influences that hold them to the wheel of birth, but they are also released from the mutable cross. And the idea is that they are released from what is known as the center of humanity. And that's one of the 3 planetary centers that are referred to in this book. The next type of death or initiation is Scorpio, and this brings about the death of personality. And in that respect, the individual is released into the fixed cross, and here they are released into the planetary center known as the hierarchy. So I've mentioned this before, this cryptic idea of these beings who have this benevolent sort of oversight role in relation to humanity. They don't interfere too much, but they're very much engaged in the evolution of humanity. So here it comes quite controversial again. Finally, Aries, the cardinal cross initiation. This is characterized very much by war and strife, which brings purification eventually, and the mind is finally released, and the divine plan becomes evident. But that only happens once we finish those 12 incarnations on the cardinal cross. And there's this release into this mystical place called Shambhala, which we have no comprehension of because it's all about the divine plan. So the idea underpinning these deaths or initiations is to force us to let go of control. So we have these traumatic potentially experiences depending on the cross that we happen to be on. We can't explain them. We don't think it's fair. We've done all the right things. We've ticked the right boxes, and yet these things happen to us, and it forces us to let go of control. So one way when we of determining where the subject that you're reading for might be in terms of the evolution is by considering whether they're undergoing any of these 3 deaths. So this is very important, this next bit, which is about looking at the sun as an indicator of the unfoldments of planetary consciousness. And on the one hand, there's the distinction between the great illusion and the path of light. So on the one hand, we have the great illusion, which is represented by the mutable cross. And there you can see there's a particular clockwise direction, motion, as the individual moves through those various zodiac signs, starting at Cancer. And that is where they're only aware of self, they're only aware of developing the personality, and they have no notion of soul. Then on the other hand, you have the path of light. First path of light path is the fixed cross. And here you can see the arrows are going anti-clockwise. So this is where the individual becomes soul aware and can therefore reverse the order of the zodiac signs. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail as we don't have time, but what I would say is that the order of the zodiac sign is really about the energies that influence us cosmically, that filter down through the solar system, through the planets, and into and affect our etheric bodies. So that's the distinction in terms of the order of the zodiac signs, and you'll see why I'm making that distinction shortly. For now, just focus on the particular direction. Anti-clockwise would be the path of light. You'll see that I've got no start block for the fixed cross. And that is because I think the jury's out in terms of where an individual needs to start. I don't think it makes a difference personally. I think they might find that at a particular point, they manage to get off the mutable cross. They could start in Cancer. Maybe it's logical to argue that they start in Aries, but that's an argument for a different day. The other path of light direction is of course represented by the cardinal cross. So this is the initiate. And as I said, they have exactly 12 incarnations. And here I think the start is important. And the reason is, if we have exactly 12 incarnations when we're on the cardinal cross, logic dictates that we need to finish in Capricorn because we start in Cancer. And that's certainly put forward as a theory, as gospel essentially by Alice Bailey. If that is indeed the case, then logically we must start in Aquarius. And so it's quite interesting. If you theoretically have someone in front of you who you're reading for, and you think that they are sufficiently evolved, and that's important for various reasons, only you can make the judgment on that to know, then perhaps it's helpful to you to be able to say, well, if you think so-and-so is on the cardinal cross and they're a Sun Leo, that gives them, they're more than halfway or just about halfway through their 12 incarnations, and therefore, that's where, and they're headed to Virgo in the next incarnation. Quite interesting to think about. I have put in front of you a table of the rulerships, planetary rulerships that we're all very familiar with as astrologers. These are second nature to us. The only thing that might be new to us is the attribution of the rays. And I'll go into that shortly. The orthodox rulerships, which, it's a bit of an archaic reference to ordinary man. Obviously, it applies across the piece. This book was published in the 50s. I probably didn't mention at the start, so it's a little bit archaic. But the fact is that these orthodox rulerships apply to the majority of people, so the people who are ostensibly on the mutable cross, and they will conform to the orthodox planetary interpretations. And that's the key thing to remember. On the other hand, we have the unorthodox rulerships, and here's where it gets quite strange and quite interesting. If we take the view that an individual is either on the fixed or cardinal cross, there's an entirely new set of rulers, and you can start reading a chart using these rulers. And this is important because it's very important, because if you have someone who's on the fixed or cardinal cross, the key thing to remember is that the ordinary rulerships will have ceased to have had such a strong effect on their lives. So if they have some very treacherous patterns in their chart, and you're wondering why they haven't been too badly affected by them, or they're not particularly material, this could be why, because there's a whole other set of rulerships that apply. You'll see that Earth is there in italics as a rule of Sagittarius, which is quite interesting. We might say as astrologers, that doesn't make sense. How can Earth, we're reading the chart from a heliocentric point of view. We're on Earth. How does it work? The reality is, under this esoteric astrology philosophy, Earth rules Sagittarius, and all it's saying is that the individual with this pattern in their chart will be all about developing panoramic awareness. So in other words, the obsession or focus on self becomes a focus on group awareness. You also have Vulcan, which is a hypothetical planet, which Bailey refers to frequently in her works. And that, she says, is the key to the soul's task in the wheel of life. I'm going to talk very briefly about the rays. These rays, according to this philosophy, are emitted from the constellation Ursa Major. They have a tangible effect on our solar system and therefore humanity. They express themselves through the various zodiacal constellations. And they are, importantly, the purpose of this is to express divine will, which we can never understand, as I mentioned before. And also potentially doesn't sit very comfortably with us is the fact that this divine will is being exercised whether we like it or not. So this theory says that divine will has been expressed through the cosmos, trickles all the way down through the planets, through the solar system, through the planets to Earth and to humanity. And to some extent, we don't have control, nor do we understand what's happening. So things are happening that scare us potentially, and we don't know. And yet we do have the ability to work on evolution of the soul and to focus on what we've come in to grapple with in a particular lifetime. This, again, I would encourage you to use this as an aid memoir. It's very detailed, I'm not going to go through it all, but another critical aspect of reading the chart from an esoteric astrology point of view is examining the rays and what they might indicate about the individual. For example, if your subject has a lot of ray 1 and ray 7 in their chart, and it's very clear through the associated constellations and so forth, you might be able to make the deduction that the individual is in fact on the cardinal cross, because ray 1 and ray 7 are all about the cardinal cross. And in fact, if you look at ray 7, it's about giving effect to divine intention. So if you see someone who's potentially highly evolved, giving effect to what presumably, again, it's subjective, what they believe is divine intention. Obviously, you've got to make the judgment as to whether that's a balanced belief, and you've got to weigh it up against all of those various factors. That might be an indication that you're dealing with someone who's quite advanced. Key planetary dynamics, I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information, so I'm just going to talk about a few of these things and you can go back to the notes in your own time. But essentially, the important things to draw out from this is that, as I said, the theory is as we become more evolved, more soul aware, the traditional orthodox planets have less and less of a tangible impact on us. And in fact, it's rather the zodiacal energies flowing through the planets that are more important, and we can apply the unorthodox rulerships. Sun is key to look at the unfoldment of the consciousness, to see what we've already achieved and integrated. Rising sign will show us the spiritual goal and purpose of the immediate incarnation. The moon is helpful mostly for people on the mutable or fixed cross, because it's very much about limitations. It's about the prison of the soul. Whereas the theory, according to Alice Bailey, is that when you get to the cardinal cross, your soul is no longer imprisoned. So just things to factor in. There are also a couple of methods which I'm not going to go into now. If they're of interest to you, you can pursue them. I've summarized there on the right-hand side by way of techniques that you can use for interpretation. So again, looking at these things gives us further insight into the chart. So here I've summarized how to draw the lines of the soul. Overriding question really is, in which direction is the subject moving around the wheel of life? Are they on the so-called path of the great illusion, where they're developing only personality and that's it? They're very sort of focused on self, which we all have to do at some point, and we're all forced to stay in this position to some point, to some extent, for many incarnations under this theory. Or have they managed to reverse the wheel because they've become soul aware? And then once you've answered that, the question is, on which cross is the subject likely to be on? And then, depending on the answers to that, you can start applying those various interpretive tools. I want to very quickly touch on Dion Fortune as a case study. And the argument very broadly is that we might be able to classify her as an initiate. In other words, someone who was on the cardinal cross. For those of you who aren't familiar with her, she was also a mystic, teacher, and writer. She was a 20th century ceremonial magician, supposedly engaged in spiritual warfare against Hitler in World War II. So she was very focused on sort of the helping to teach the masses and to bring about a group awareness. She ran her own spiritual temple, quite an interesting character. I would argue that if you look at the first house in particular, there's a heavy influence of Libra. You have the ascendant, you do have the mood, you have Uranus, which rules esoterically Libra under the unorthodox rulerships. Jupiter gives effect to the cardinal cross, and you can see it sextile the sun. And the sun is what indicates the unfoldment of consciousness. So although the sun is in Sagittarius, remember, if you're on the cardinal cross, you could be on any one of those zodiac signs. And there's a lot to this, but one of the things I would draw out is that the Libra is associated with the seventh ray, which is also one very strong indication of the cardinal cross. Her MC is in Cancer, which is also cardinal. I've already spoken about Jupiter. And if we did take the view that she was on the cardinal cross, you could then say, well, she looks like she's one lifetime away from escaping the wheel. Lots to talk about. We don't have time to go into it, but you're welcome to go back to that and think about those factors for yourself, but very interesting to consider. And then I just want to very quickly begin to wrap this up by leaving you with a thought on the science of triangles, which is a dense subject all in itself in these books. It's very much around the theory that underpinning all of this esoteric astrology and the workings of the universe are these triangles of energy, which operate both macrocosmically and microcosmically, and they give effect to the divine plan. Important thing to note is that all of this eventually filters down and affects us etherically. We're all joined up, so we're going to feel some sort of impact. But obviously, the key is for us, as we become more self-aware, to develop the consciousness to realize that we have to establish self-determination and make our own choices. And essentially, astrology gives us the tool to catalog the response of that energy to form, whether it's the human body or it's the cosmic bodies. And I think I will pause there because I've been going on at top speed for some time. I think I've reached the 25 minutes, Tracie.
Wow, thank you very much. You're actually bang on time. So you didn't go over at all. So this is absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions here. Pearl is asking, how do you determine which cross you're passing through? And can you ever calculate which 12th stage you are on?
Very interesting question, and one that I've spent some time pondering. I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear. I think it goes back to these factors that I've mentioned. Let me go back and get to the relevant slide. There are various factors that we need to think about in order to determine whether we're on the cross. And one of the things that I would point you to in the first instance is this table of the rays. So have a think about this. Have a think about what might resonate with you. For example, do you think in your work you have the feeling that you are here to be of service to the divine, and you don't know why, but you feel there's some sort of divine purpose? You might then have a strong affiliation to ray 7. But also, if you look at what the rays are associated with in terms of the planetary rulers, you can get a sense by how densely populated specific rays are in your chart of which cross you might be on. So you've really got to spend some time with this material and try to assimilate it. So if, for example, you're wondering whether you may be on the fixed sign and on the fixed cross, and you know that you have a lot of Leo and a lot of Taurus, and then you look at the rays 1 and 2, and those particular definitions or interpretations resonate with you, well, that's potentially one argument to say that you are in fact grappling with fixed cross issues, and therefore you are on the fixed cross. It's just some of the various factors that you have to take into account. Yeah, it is fairly complex, but if you use the tables that I've summarized there, it'll give you an idea, an initial idea as to where you potentially might be placed, and only you will be able to make that judgment, unless you have an astrologer who happens to know this inside out. And by the way, this is my theory. I have not read up on anyone else's theory on this subject matter.
So if somebody wanted to maybe find out more, would they be able to have a session with yourself to help determine perhaps which cross that they're on?
Very happy to help, yeah. And just going back to the question in terms of the 12 incarnations, that's an interesting one. That assumes, sorry if I can just quickly deal with that, that would also assume that you're on the cardinal cross. So let's just take it back. Cardinal cross, exactly 12 incarnations. You know that not only are you aware of your soul, the fact that you have to be soul driven, but you have a strong sense of working with the divine plan. You're mentally in touch with mystical beings, is the theory that Alice Bailey is putting out there. And you have that connection. That would be a few indications that you might be on that cross. And then you would be able to see, well, say your sun is in Gemini, you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lifetimes before you would theoretically move off the cardinal cross. Quite controversial material that we're dealing with, but there you have it.
Thank you, Lara. Christy's asking, I noticed you use whole houses. Is that what you would recommend? She's basically referring to, she said she may have missed it, but do you establish whether someone is on the cardinal cross by their ascendant? So she's just wanting to find out a little bit more about which cross.
Valid question. To put it quite simply, it doesn't matter which house sign you use. You can use whatever house sign you favor. The key point is which sign your sun is in, depending on regardless of what your house system is. I tend to favor the whole sign house system because I have a distinctly Hellenistic astrology bias, and I found that it works best for me. Occasionally I'll use other houses, but I generally stick to the whole sign house, and that's the only reason I do, but it's certainly not connected to this system. And in fact, I would reckon Alice Bailey is unlikely to have used the whole sign house system. It wasn't particularly popular at the time, but who knows, maybe she did.
Okay, thank you. Christy, I hope that answers your question. Does anybody else have any questions? Jamie's written, do you teach a course or have a more in-depth presentation? More than 25 minutes, basically.
It was a tricky ask, but I thought it's important that we begin to start to get some of this out there so people can begin to familiarize themselves with it and decide whether or not they think it's useful. To answer your question, though, I am thinking along those lines, so watch the space. There may be developments along those lines in future, but at the moment, I'm not actively teaching it.
Okay, and this Jamie's actually asked for the presentation as well. So I'm going to put Lara's email in the chat box now for everybody. So anybody who would like the presentation email to them directly, Lara will be more than happy to do that. So I'm going to pop that in the chat box now. Okay, any more questions for Lara? Sorry, you can hear me typing away in the background. I'm typing and chatting at the same time. I'm a Gemini, so I can do that. Okay, so Lara's email is in the chat box now, so please message her, Jamie, and anyone else who would like the presentation. That was absolutely fascinating, Lara. Thank you so much. Okay, unless is there anything else that you'd like to say before we
just thank you. One last thought. This is immensely complex and there are a number of different factors. And as I said earlier, it's all about making a judgment once you've brought all those factors together into a coherent form. So there's no sort of quick answer to this, and it does require careful reflection and obviously careful dealing when one's sitting in front of the client.
Thank you. Yes, it's definitely something. I mean, obviously Alice Bailey's work is extremely in depth, so it's not a quick bedtime read, is it? It's definitely years of study. So thank you for bringing this complex material into our spheres at this time. Very I think it's needed for those people that resonate with this kind of work. So thank you so much, Lara. And we can also, if there's time at the end, we can open up the floor for more questions. But now we're going to head over to Mr. Julian Venables for his presentation. And this presentation is about interacting with the four elements, the mythic forces of the Greek philosophers. So at this current juncture of human evolution, we must remember the importance of elemental thinking when comprehending and responding to ecological problems. If we use the four element consciousness and language, we can engage directly with the world to evoke many kinds of wonder, sensuous, poetic, cognitive, scientific, and reverential. The four elements contain the loftiest and most imaginative thinking, whilst providing us with a relevant and renewed vision of the environment and the possibilities of the world we would wish to create. So Julian is the chairman of the Brighton Astrology Group and has written for Solar Fire Gold. He is the author of The Astrologer's Apprentice from 2015 and gives client readings at www.londonastrologer.com. He is an international speaker, and you can find him on his YouTube channel, Julian, the London Astrologer. So without further ado, and last but of course not by no means least, Mr. Julian Venables, over to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tracie. Can everybody hear me? I think I'm unmuted and ready to go. Thank you for the invite today. It's a pleasure to meet you all or talk to you all via Zoom. And so I've got a lot to say today. I'm really getting into writing a book at the moment because I think I've really deeply researching or getting right into the real what it really is all about. And so I'm getting into like a kind of Greek philosophy and stuff like that. I'm skirting around the edges of, I've been reading some of the texts and starting to really get into it. So today, this is just a very small part of what I really want to sort of the theory that I'm going to be bringing to the world. And as I said, I'm writing my book. So I've just given you today is like a 20-25 minutes of some beginning thoughts around where I'm going with this. But so I've called this the four elements. The idea is that, I'll just sort of see where we go with this, okay? There are actually not many charts in this, but there is one diagram, very important diagram later on that I'm going to, my whole book will be based on. So, so hopefully, there we go. So I'm going to start with a quote from the artist called Andy Goldsworthy, who's more of a sculptor. He really works with the elements. He's got some beautiful books, if you've ever got any spare time and you want to have a look at some really nice artwork that works with nature, then look at Andy Goldsworthy. He's based in the north of England. he has got fantastic sculptured artwork that he uses the 4 elements basically. And so he says, we often forget that we are nature. Nature is not something separate from us. So when we say that we have lost our connection to nature, we have lost our connection to ourselves. And with that in mind, I'm going to mention here how William Lilly, back in the 17th century, used to refer to having the gift of astrology as having supernatural sight. That is to say, and that if you break that down into the etymology of the word supernatural, it was the Victorians who kind of changed the meaning of the word into something that would say spooky or scary. What it actually means, if you take the etymology of the word, is superior to nature. And that is an above view or supernatural. So you go up and beyond into the idea of observation, which is much different to just looking at something. It's actually observing something. And that is a part of a deeper understanding there. But that's what I want to introduce to you there. I'm hoping that this talk will give you a lot to think about. So the ancients used to see the world, and I'm talking about the ancients, I'm talking about how it started. So we're looking at like pre-Socratic philosophers. Okay, so this is around about 500 BC. The ancients used to see the world with just their 5 senses. And that is literally all they had. Okay, so the premise I'm basing this talk on is simply stated that all is mind. And that is a key to so much, okay? And I'll leave it like that rather than go down too into the rabbit hole with that particular statement. But that really is where we're at, okay? Because everything is mind, all right? And that is quite a deep thing. How you can have a nice little think about that later on. But there we go, right? So one of the ancient philosophy questions was, what are the primordial substances from which everything is made up of? And so some of the early philosophers thought that one element made up all the materials of the world, as it were. So Anaximenes thought it was air, because we breathe as human beings. We breathe in and out. That's an airy movement, you know, and the breeze blows and the winds blow and so forth. Okay, so Heraclitus thought that it was fire, because if you touch us, you know, we're warm-blooded. You can feel the warmth in ourselves. We generate a heat, and therefore our primordial substances are fire. And Thales thought it was water, because of course we have to drink water in order to survive. You know, you can't go into the desert without having lots of water. You know, so and Xenophonus thought that it was earth, because of course we do have a corporeal substance to us. We are a kind of solid material substance to us. Okay, so these are how they used to think. And before these guys, right, before these philosophers, there was actually what I'm starting to see in my research is what they call divinity. Okay, so these philosophers started to pick apart the experience of divinity, and this I'm going back to prior to 600 BC. Okay, so and out of this is how as the Greek city-states were formulated, and therefore this led over several hundred years to Hellenistic astrology. Okay, so which was of course the system that astrology then developed out of, all the astrology we know today. And so what I'm looking at here is this idea of, you know, what I'm going to be going into in my book, and is essentially discovering more about divinity. So we get to around about the 5th century BC, and then there was this philosopher called Empedocles, and he proposed that all 4 elements, fire, earth, air, and water, are together the primordial substances. There's a blend of all of it. And he called this, or called them, rhizomata, which means roots in ancient Greek. And as you can see there, it's a unification. The image there is to give you the idea that everything is unified as 4 elements, and then there's another element surrounding that, which is the ring surrounding all 4 of them. Funnily enough, it's kind of almost a bit like the Olympic rings in its own way, but I'm not going down that that symbolic route there. But the idea of rhiza mater is a very important context. Now, the Empedocles regarded the elements as something very ordinary, or I beg your pardon, originary and primary, thus the cause and the source of all that exists. So this term roots derives from the biological and genealogical realms, which suggest natural growth, change, and movement, perhaps even a fluidity that is capable of reversibility. So speaking of fire, earth, air, and water as rhiza mater indicates the vitality of the substructure of the physical world and implies their power. So Empedocles was the first philosopher to thematically use 4 elements to explain the entire world order. And by using the terminology of roots, he sets the trajectory for later thinking about them. So the language of roots is significant because it continues to function in philosophy in the sense of something elemental, grounded, or foundational, including etymological roots, as in the roots of words. So it is allied closely with notions of systems and arboreal structures, such as branches of knowledge, or evolutionary bushes, or grammatical trees. So the idea is that language, or descriptions of language, also carry this idea of rooted systems within it. And so here is a diagram to start to help us think a little bit about root systems. And so the word root has meanings and uses in the English language. Root not only refers to an underground portion of a plant, but also has meanings in the disciplines of music, mathematics, anthropology, and even dentistry. So in all cases, root refers to a basis or an origin. In plants, roots anchor the plant, absorb and conduct water and nutrients from the soil at other plant parts, and store energy for later use by the plant. So what I'm actually trying to say here is the core and basic planetary principles are fed by the elements, or the rhiza mater. And that is a metaphor that we can use to describe planets with elements. So look at this image here, right? And you've got like imagine, if you like, a planetary principle as a germinating seed on the surface of the earth. Something lands, I don't know if you can see my pointer on the screen, but something lands on the surface of the earth and at the beginning of the life, okay, which is our birth. Okay, so the seed then grows a primary root that grows downwards into the soil. Gradually, the roots grow and penetrate the soil matrix. As the root grows downwards, so the plant, and therefore the planet, sustains itself and grows. So roots absorb water and mineral nutrients from the soil. These are feeder roots that feed the planet or the plant. It's important to give a developing personality. Therefore, as we're growing up, the developing personality is important to give them elemental words that feed their roots with positive, good, and complementary words. In fact, this is actually the basis of affirmations. So what I'm trying to say here is also the power of words. I mean, here we are as astrologers, we do charts, we talk to clients, and it's the power of the words that we use that resonate deeply with the soul, or the whole, the whole thing is in what we say. And astrology, of course, is a language. So, keep in mind how different everybody is. Each person is a different kind of a plant, and each person has a different kind of root systems. So these would be like an elemental balance, if you like, and just think about that. And of course, this is also going back to things like Galen's doctrine of signatures, and people like Nicholas Culpeper, who developed the system of rulerships, because they would look at plants and they would say, okay, so what's this plant doing? What does it have? Fast does it grow? What sort of flowers and colors and leaf shapes does it produce? What is inside the plant? What's its texture? They would use their senses, the 5 senses, to analyze the plant and look into this, and this is a bit like the personality as well. Okay, so it's a bit like saying we have, you know, how do we culture or nurture the plant? Yeah, and it's by understanding how to use the words with the planets. Okay, so and of course that's what the chart shows us, because our birth shows us which planet, which signs, and therefore we have the beginnings of how to use the words to describe planetary personality, if you like. So then you know, we can say, well, what element suits or matches your root system? The 4 elements were considered these critical energy forces that sustain life and compose the world. All of these elements are integral parts of matter or of the physical universe, and the human body is a physical creation existing in this material realm. So we are seen to be made up of and governed by the 4 elements. And everything in the physical world was observed to have a combination of 4 principal qualities. That is to say, it's hot, cold, dry, or moist. And therefore, a combination of hot and dry produces fire, hot and wet results in air, cold and dry gives earth, and cold and wet combines to produce water. So these are, and then the 4 elements combined to create life. But then there's the quintessential 5th element, which is known as ether. And ether is actually the same thing that is prana or pranayama in yoga. In Hindu, it's the ki or the chi. In Chinese, it's the Holy Spirit in Christian reference, and it's things like in Native American reference, it's the Great Spirit. So ether is these binding forces, and of course it's breath that the first breath is what we take when we're born. You know, that sets the horoscope. So it's almost like the importance of taking in the prana or the ether, and in Greek philosophy it was called the pneuma or the pneuma. I still haven't quite decided whether it's pronounced pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A, or pneuma, which is another way of describing it. But that's where the word pneumatic comes from, which is a movement of air or air pressure. And so that's a very famous, you know, that was kind of phased out and replaced with Holy Spirit. Otherwise, in Western culture, we'd have the idea of pneuma as being our breath. But anyway, going off a bit on a tangent there, but you get the idea, right? So I'm not going to start talking too much about the keywords of the elements, because, you know, I don't think I've got enough time to try and, you know, talk to you about this today. But I just want you to think about this idea of root systems and how words are important to feed plants. And if you take the horizontal line here, you've got the fire and the air up top, and you've got the water and the earth underneath. Okay, the 2 elemental balance there. So it's the sun and the air up top that feeds the plant up top. Underneath it's the water and the earth, and the dividing line is the horizon. And when you look at the chart, of course, you've got things like that horizontal line. You know, you've got things like, when people talk about the IC of the chart, they're talking about deepest emotional roots. What's the roots? You know, the MC being the canopy or the growth at the top. So there's this idea there that like a plant, we are also growing. You know, and we've got this sense of an above horizon and a below, and what goes on underneath and on top. And it's a lot more complex than that, of course, but it just gives you a metaphoric idea for things. Okay, so so let's have a look then at this idea of how elements move naturally towards their place in the universe. So you know, earth moves down, fire moves up, water and air are in between, and you know, that, as I just showed you with the tap root there, that's the horizontal line, and fire and air move upwards. You know, that's why the plant grows above the soil, and water and earth move downwards, and you have to feed. When you water your plants, the water goes into the earth, it's going down, it's trying to get to the bottom of the earth. It's trying to go up. Fire is even higher than that because heat rises. If you have a cup of earth and you turn it to one side, the earth doesn't go upwards, the earth goes downwards. Same with a cup of water. If you turn it like this, it's going to pour downwards. Whereas if you have a bit of fire and, you know, like a little censer or blazer of fire, you get the idea that the heat's rising. So so Aristotle, a student of Plato, who was who Plato in turn was a student of Socrates, Aristotle is essentially describing the universe in animistic terms. So he would ask the question, why does a piece of chalk fall? Because the earth desires it to be at the center of the universe. So by definition, earth is heavy, it wants to fall down. Fire is light, it wants to go up. And so, you know, this is a sort of an interesting way of looking at things, you see. So we're looking at elemental balance, and you can therefore start to count out, for example, the planets in your chart. You know, one of the techniques is to count out and look at the elements of the elemental balance. More on that, as I said, this is extremely extremely condensed talk. I've taken so much out of this in order to just present 20 minutes today. So here we have that consistently moving sense. And this is like a weather report right here, you know, because let's just say, you know, when a hurricane would produce lots of wind and water, it would rain a lot, you know, and afterwards the rain, then the humidity, then the water goes back up to make clouds again, you know, so it's a constant movement of things. So fire is hot and dry, earth was dry and cold, air is hot and wet, and water was wet and cold. And he then talked about, Aristotle talked about the fifth element again, ether, being the quintessence, the number 5, which is associated with the heavenly realm. Okay, so I'll get back to that very shortly in a minute. So let's go back quickly to this idea of planetary first principles. So we have to look at the word principle. The etymology of the word means origin or source or beginning. And the principles are often referred to, I believe, you know, the philosophers talk about principles, planetary principles. So we're looking at the idea of the Latin principium, which is a beginning, a commencement, an origin, but also in plural, it's foundation or elements. And then in French, you've got printemps, which is spring, or and therefore it's the thing that takes first, or the primus, the first thing, or to grasp something. So is the idea of principles. So in English, it's principle, and we have this idea that a law or a truth or the tenets or doctrines of a system on which everything is founded. And therefore, it's also a right rule of conduct, which brings us to the idea of astrological rulerships. So now, astrology, okay, and life is built on language, thought, and the mind. So metaphors are integral in our daily conversations, in our cultures, in our cognitive processes, and in our representation of the world we live in. So we as humans structure our way of thinking, and we access reality, and we cognitize about almost all matters in the world through metaphors expressed in language. So therefore, we have much power when understanding the 4 elements as metaphor. And this is a concept that is much wider and deeper than we normally think. Most of our thoughts are actually composed of and embodied in metaphor. I mean, it is everywhere and it's in everything. And therefore, it's a must for us to get into the idea of metaphor and how to use it, right? Because in language, in mind, in thinking, in cognition, you know, how do we use our metaphors and how empowering can they be? Because astrology is the idea of creating magic, you know, and therefore, what are we saying that makes the magic? Okay, so that is part of what it is. You know, the power of reading charts is second to none. You know, it's the greatest of the arts. So I can ask the question, what is your tree like? That is to say, you know, what is the 4 essential elements exist in all of us, and their unique combinations determine our distinct personalities. So the elements represent energy and symbolize different facets of human life, and everything comes from nature, right? That's hot and dry, wet and cold. All this is nature oriented. That's why I refer to it as this idea of a kind of constantly moving weather report, but it's inside of us as well. It's in our nature to be like that, you know, everything's shifting, everything changes, everything is always immutable and changeable. So consequently, we become aware of our connection with nature and our relationship with the divine. And it's the relationship with the divine that I'm really going to be getting onto in my book. But anyway, so Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century AD, he applied the theory of the 4 elements to astrology, and he assigned each element 3 zodiac signs, which together make up the triplicity of that element. Okay, so that's when it really came into focus. All right, and to the system that we use today. All right, that was from the 2nd century AD onwards. So to connect it all together, metaphors are the words that speak to our souls. And when looking at the chart, the correct use of the words themselves has much power. So words are also linked to the imagination. The exterior metaphor describing something outside of the self lights up on the inside of the mind as well. Okay, so that now brings me to this diagram. And this is the peak of what I'm trying to talk about today. This is the Aristotelian cosmology. And in Latin there, just so you can, just to describe the first statement at the top there, schema huius promissi divisionis spherorum, means the outline of this section of the spheres. The other Latin around the edge means the heaven of empires, the abode of God and of all the elect, which is this larger words around the outside. Okay, so here we have the Aristotelian cosmology. Now this was, for 1500 years, this was the way the world saw. Okay, at least up until, well, yeah, okay, so this is the ancient way of seeing the world, right? And as you can see in the center there are the 4 elements, because we exist under the sublunar realm. So we have the moon going around us by its orbit, and we are underneath the influence of the moon. So everything goes through the moon. And Plato talked about how the soul, as it descends into birth, it descends through the spheres, through the 7 spheres, it collecting garments on the way. So it's like putting on a sense of wearing things as it came down through the 7 spheres, gets to the moon, and the moon is the birth. And this, of course, is why lunar and fertility is so linked, because to be born, we have to come through the moon. So the soul has to come through the moon. And then we have here the realm of the 4 elements. And that is where we are. We are inside the realm of 4 elements, which is the material, corporeal substance that we are existing in. And as you can see in this image here, there's a little earthy, like a little island with a house and some trees, a little river, a lake, a pond, all that sort of stuff. It's really very quite nice. And then there's some airy bit around here, which is like clouds and stuff. And then there's the fiery realm, and the lunar here is the first sphere. And as you can see, there's a new moon, a crescent moon, a full moon, and another moon, you know, like the waning moon. So you can see it's marked out as the 4 major moon phases. And then we got through. Now there's so much more to say about this. This is where I'm really getting into it in my book. I've got some fantastic stuff that I can't wait to show you all, but I can't tell you it quite today. But it is, I'm very excited about this. So basically, this view, which was common in antiquity, was that the stars have souls. So this idea arose and developed from the idea that there were living heavenly bodies. Okay, so the human soul has a vehicle which is made of an astral substance, and that is, of course, scientists say we're all made from carbon. You know, well, that's the astral substance. But the Aristotelian universe is a many-sphered model that is invested with physical and ethereal reality. So physical things occupy the sublunar realm, where we are. We're in this physical realm, and ethereal things occupy the celestial realm, which is up past the moon. Okay, and the moon is constantly changing, because the moon looks down onto the sublunar realm of our physical world, and it looks that way as well, and it looks out into the perfect celestial realms, the unseen heavens, and that's why the moon's face is always changing, right? It never shows us the same face, because it's always shifting in its mood, right? So we see this constantly shifting pattern over a course of, say, 1 month, over the month. you know, but the idea is that the moon has this two actual ways of, it sees the celestial heavens that are perfect, and it sees the imperfect physical world. So there's a dividing line. The moon is the dividing line between the earthly realm and the heavenly realm, and that is the orbit of the moon. So therefore, we are in the sublunar realm, surrounded by the perfect order of the heavens. So the celestial realm, up past the moon, is this idea that it's perfect and changeless. Okay, and there reside the ethereal spheres, as you can see in the diagram there. They are the celestial objects composed of ether, which are incorruptible or not changing. And then they are in a natural motion, which is considered to be circular. And then at the top edge of that, up here, you have Saturn is the seventh heaven. And people will say, I'm in seventh heaven. Yes, that means that they are pretty high up and out there because they're enjoying themselves. They're up in their seventh heaven. And then when people say, oh, I'm over the moon. Yes, that's right. Yes, I'm feeling really over the moon today because maybe something really amazing happened in my life and it took me up past the moon. Okay. Or maybe someone might say heavens above. Ah, yes, indeed, there are heavens above. So you kind of move through the spheres, you see. So anyway, just some little terminologies there that kind of help paint the picture a bit. But the idea is that we have the seven heavens, and then we have the eighth sphere, which is the firmament. That is the sky dome. And remember that the ancient philosophers have five senses, and we also have those same five senses. So it's a dome of the sky. And then we have and that's the first level of the zodiac signs. And then the second level is called the crystalline sky, or the crystalline sphere. And that's a beautiful thing because it's many faceted, and that's how light works. So it's very deep stuff, this, but it's really amazing. And then they get to the primum mobile, and it's the primum mobile, which is the love of God that moves all things. Now, we're going to I could just very briefly talk about Dante's Divine Comedy here in the book 3 called Paradise, where he travels. I'm not going to do it today. There's so much to tell you, and I have to reduce this down, but because I've got so much more to tell you yet, right? But okay. So the primum mobile is the idea of the realm of God, or as it says here, the heaven of empires, the abode of God, and all the elect. Okay, so that is like, you know, it's enough for now, right? But this is an amazing accompaniment to a chart, all right? And that's what my book's about. I'm writing a book that makes this diagram accompany a normal horoscope that we're all used to looking at. Okay, so that's what I'm fusing two things together with an idea that there's something very special in there that will bring us to to enjoy divinity within creation. And so that's what my book's about. And I've said probably a bit too much today, but I'm hoping I can be invited back to talk about this when I've got a little bit more ready for it. But so there's the world, according to Aristotle, nested spheres of planets and the fixed stars surrounding the Earth at the center. That used to be the old way of seeing the world. So things move naturally in a circular way, which is the cycles of time, and therefore the celestial sphere is, you know, divided into different ways, and so forth and so forth. And it's all to do with filled with ether, which is the breath that is the breath of life. So there's one more there. So just to remind ourselves, we have Earth at the center, the four elements in this realm: the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, so forth. It's this idea that in the sublunar realm, everything is ever changing, it's complicated, it's chaotic, it's human. In the supralunar, above the moon, everything is eternal, there are no changes other than perfect. It's the complete circular motion and divine. So the sublunar world is imperfect, that is we live our lives in the imperfect world, and then beyond the world is perfect, unchangeable, and eternal. And now we have this idea here of I might have to go back a couple of slides because I wanted to give you a quote about metaphors, and I think I might have just jumped over it. Here it is. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this because I wanted to give you a quote about metaphors that I think puts everything into focus with respect to that cosmological diagram that I just showed you. So this is from an author called George Lakoff, and he wrote a book called Metaphors We Live By. And so it's a reasonably short quote, but it gives you an idea of things about how the power of language and words. We are physical beings, bounded and set off from the rest of the world by the surface of our skins, and we experience the rest of the world as outside us. Each of us is a container with a bounding surface and an in-out orientation. We project our own in-out orientation onto other physical objects that are bounded by surfaces. Thus, we also view them as containers with an inside and an outside. Rooms and houses are obvious containers. Moving from room to room is moving from one container to another. That is, moving out of one room and into another. We even give solid objects this orientation, as when we break a rock open to see what's inside it. We impose this orientation on our natural environment as well. A clearing in the woods is seen as having a bounding surface, and we can view ourselves as being in the clearing or out of the clearing of the woods or out of the woods. A clearing in the woods is something we can perceive as a natural boundary, the fuzzy area where the trees more or less stop and the clearing more or less begins. But even where there is no natural physical boundary that can be viewed as defining a container, we impose boundaries, marking off territory so that it has an inside and a bounding surface, whether it's a wall, a fence, an abstract line, or a plane. There are few human instincts more basic than territoriality, and such defining of a territory, putting a boundary around it, is an act of quantification. Okay, that now I'll bring you back to that, and briefly to say that the moon is a boundary, okay, between us and the realms and of this earthly realm, and then you go up through the heavens, and Saturn is a boundary, which we all know. Saturn is the boundary, and then past that you then have all these super cosmic stars, the other worlds, the firmament, the crystalline sphere, and the primum mobile. So these are the two boundaries, the moon and the Saturn, and therefore to work with metaphors, words that teach us about containers. It's deep stuff, but I'm getting there, and I'm going to present that as my next talk. Okay, and there's, so, as I said, just so much more. We do have a couple of
questions, actually, Julian. Just sorry to interrupt you there.
Yes.
Yes. Just yeah, I don't know whether you just want to ask a couple, if that's okay.
Yes, please do. Yeah.
So Christy asked, what do the words in Latin around the outer circle mean?
Yes, thank you. So I translated them here from using Google Translate. So the larger capital words here are the heaven of, according to Google Translate, are the heaven of empires, the abode of God and of all the elect. I would actually go to say that this is the from my basic Latin that I learned at school from a long time ago. Coelum is the sky. Imperium is the whole, like the imperia, the whole sort of realm of space, if you like. Habaticum is where one lives. Dei is God, and all et omni, all elected, or the elect, which is like the angels, basically. So this is the empirical sky in which lives God and all the elect. Google Translate said the heaven of empires, the abode of God and all the elect. So it's basically, but here's the thing. What I've worked out about this is basic quantum physics as well, and I've got such a beautiful thing to spring on you when the next time I give you a talk, because just keep this in mind. I hope you come back and talk to me again or listen to me again, because I'm working on this. This is an ongoing project that I'm really enjoying doing. It's blowing my mind, actually. I love it. I've got complicated things that I'm trying to make simple, but it's fun. I'll just tell you from an astrological perspective, I have the moon in Pisces, and Neptune is transiting my moon in Pisces and has been kind of on and around it for about the last year or so. And I found all that. I've just been getting into this, and it's just like the most incredible thing. And because I have Mars in Scorpio conjunct Neptune, and the transiting Neptune is trining that Mars and Neptune, so I feel I'm on the right track, put it that way. And I know I've got something really, really fascinating. That's all I can say, because you know, I could go off on too many tangents. I could just, you know, but it's this is a map of quantum physics as well. Okay, and when you see that, when I explain that to you, it's really quite amazing. So I'm sure I've told it to other people, a few people, you know, I've been explaining it, but it's basically this is us as well. Okay, that outer edge, this idea of the heaven of empires, the abode of God and all the elect, is actually us, right? We are here, we are in the center, but here we are on the outside as well. And one has to have love and self-love, and then one can be divine and reach divinity, which is the basis of, I'm saying, probably said too much, but I love it. I love what I'm saying, and I'm so pleased to have found this so far. It's quite exciting.
Julian,
I'll get, yeah.
Sorry, I just have another question from Pearl here. She wants to know, if language is conscious expression through metaphor, in what realm do dreams exist? Question mark. In ether? Question mark. I don't know whether you can answer that. That's quite a big question. I'm not sure.
Once again, please, Tracie.
If language is conscious expression through metaphor, in what realm do dreams exist? In ether? Question mark. I'm not. That's quite a big question. So I just.
Okay then. Okay. This is a major part of my book, basically, the moon is imagery, and Mercury is rational. Okay, so the moon is the unconscious mind and the unconscious imagery that comes up all the time, and that's all I'm going to say for now. Right, and it is dreams. Yeah, moon is very dreams. Lunar is extremely dream oriented. Okay, right. I've got so much more to tell you guys. Oh my God. And I hope I can come back and do something soon. Okay, I've got one more, just a few. I've got a few more little bits and pieces here in just this is the last slide, and I've just got a few more bits and pieces to say, a little bit more about what Plato said about the soul to get you all thinking. Okay. One thing which is, you know, these are like little takeaway things, you know, you can go, oh, that was interesting, you know, something like that. And so one thing which is clear is that the astral soul itself is invisible. We do not look upon the soul, we only calculate its movements mathematically. That was Plato, okay? So one thing which is clear is the astral soul itself is invisible. We don't look upon it, but we calculate its movements mathematically. That's the chart. As Plato said in his book, The Republic, it is not what is seen in heaven which is important, but what is intelligible. Okay, and time came into being with heaven, and its markers are the sun, the moon, and the other 5 planets. The succession of days, nights, months, and years, which we see in the movements of the heavenly bodies, has then given us not only our understanding of time, but our concept of number and the ability to inquire about nature. Sight was invented so that we might observe the circuits of heaven and so be improved in our minds, which are akin to the stars and also rotate, though much less perfectly. Plato believes the soul and God are invisible, and he also stresses that God cannot be spatially located. To say that God is beyond heaven is not to set him in a particularly remote place, but to say that he cannot be thought of in terms of time and space, which have themselves come into being. And finally, mathematical training is combined with astronomical theories, for number is a divine gift which has been granted to humanity to be learned through the observation of heavenly revolution, and is a prerequisite of wisdom. Their precise movement is a proof of universal divine providence and the priority of soul to body. So there's some things to think about, actually there's just one more. Plato claimed that the circular movement of the heavens can be a guide to us in the exercise of mind, and he provided a mythic rationale for the importance of heaven by suggesting that the soul moved in a circular fashion in the process of making correct judgments and in knowing. And that really kind of rounds it up. There's so much more. I'm really looking forward to hopefully coming back and talking to you soon, and getting my book published. So you can find me if you're interested in talking to me more about this. Please come and find me. I got into astrology more than 25 years ago. I got my chart done in 1988. I started reading books then. I started doing charts in 1995, and I then got really serious and got my diploma in 2010. So the website I have is called londonastrologer.com. Please visit it and sign up for my free newsletter, because I will send out a weekly almanac. I do send out some writing every week, and I'm going to start to integrate more of my book theory into those. So please, and if you were interested in talking to me, because I'm looking for people to use my new theory on. So do come and talk to me about getting a special discount for reading if you sign up for the newsletter. I'm on YouTube as Julian London Astrologer. Instagram, I also have posts as London Astrologer, and in Facebook, I'm Julian Venables, the London Astrologer. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and I do hope that you'll have me back sometime. So thank you very much, Tracie and Jeff. I really do appreciate this. It's been really fab talking to you all today.
Thank you, Julian. Wonderful. Okay, so everyone's got everybody's details there. Lara's just supplied a new email address as well. We have gone over time, but I just want to ask the floor if there's any questions for Frank or Lara who are still here before we all depart for the day. There's any, if you need any more details of Frank or Lara, we can pass those over to you. There is going to be a recording of this as well. So if anyone has any other questions, do let me know in the chat. Everyone, there's lots of thank yous coming through in the chat. So yeah, I'd like to just say thank you to everybody as well today for doing another UK webinar. Jeff, do you have anything that you'd like to add at this moment?
Nope, I just want everybody to check out iAstrologer at opaastrologyevents.org, and thank you for joining us today. And Tracie, thank you for hosting, and Lara, Frank, and Julian, thank you for presenting. The recording will go out later tonight or tomorrow, so keep a lookout for that.
Wonderful. And I just want to say as well to the UK members of OPA that there is a special discount for membership that you can renew for $40 instead of $60. Even if your membership hasn't expired, you can add on another year. So that's only until September the 30th. So if you do need to extend. But unless there's any more questions, I just want to say thank you, Frank. That was wonderful. It was great to have you here, join us on OPA UK today, and Lara as well. Really fantastic content, and Julian too. So I don't know when the next UK event's going to be, but it was an absolute pleasure having you all today. So unless anyone's got anything to say, we will say, oh, hold on, Jamie. I sent to Lara my second request. Okay, Jamie's getting in touch with you, Lara. Love to all the presenters who spoke to spirit without referring to religion, says Pearl. So thank you, Pearl, for your fantastic questions. Actually, they're really good. Dee Dee says thank you all. It was excellent. Blessings. Thank you once again. So lots of love coming in from the around the world. I think that's about it from us. So anyone wants the recording, you can contact us at OPA. So
thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Wishing you all a super weekend.
Yes. Cheers.